You must be very proud of the fact that your music has been called the soundtrack for the civil rights movement.
Well, yes, I am. I still carry my dreams in spite of my conditions. The album is more of a strong lyrical feel that lends inspiration toward what we're trying to do. And it pleases me very, very much.
There are lives that, though lived brilliantly, ultimately fade into darkness. Curtis Mayfield, a music legend, was one of them. A timeless talent, a man with immense wealth, iconic songs, but in the end, he died alone in an abandoned mansion where no one remembered his name. It seemed his life would forever soar with endless joy, but behind those immortal melodies lay an unimaginable tragedy. That mansion, vast but cold, no longer echoed with laughter, only a heap of ruins. And Curtis's death. No one expected it to be not just the end of a legend, but the cruel conclusion of a life filled with illusions. If you've always thought the spotlight only holds dazzling brilliance, this story will make you reconsider what you thought you knew. On June 3, 1942, in a cramped, damp apartment in Chicago's Cabrini Green, where the smell of sweat clung to thin walls and neighbors' arguments seeped through wooden cracks, a faint cry rang out. Curtis Mayfield was born, tiny, just over 55 pounds, cradled in the arms of his mother, Marion Washington, a woman with resolute eyes but a heart full of scars. Cabrini Green wasn't a place for nurturing dreams. Rickety buildings, dark alleys teeming with gangs, and the biting winds off Lake Michigan served as a constant reminder that life here was an unending battle. Before Curtis was a year old, he watched his callous father walk out on a freezing winter afternoon, leaving behind a burden of debt and broken promises. Marion, raising 5 children alone, scraped by day after day with meager earnings from laundry work and whatever odd jobs she could find. She never cried or complained after that. She'd hold her kids tight in their chilly room to chase away the gnawing despair. Life without a family cornerstone was never easy, but she refused to let poverty devour them. Cabrini Green was a battlefield, streets littered with trash gunshots piercing the night, and kids like Curtis growing up in constant fear. In 1947, at just 5, he saw his mother kneel before their landlord, begging for more time to pay rent. Her hair was disheveled, her voice trembled, her eyes brimming with worry. That scene carved itself into his mind like a deep cut, never fading. The family moved constantly, fleeing debt, but poverty never stopped chasing them. One spring night in 1948, they had to leave again in a hurry, carrying only a few old suitcases and buried dreams. Curtis, with his small hands, clung to a pencil he used to scribble music notes on scraps of paper, as if music was the only thing that brought him peace. Music wasn't just an escape, it was a burning flame in Curtis. In November 1949, at 7 years old, he stepped into a Baptist church where the smell of old wood mingled with the sound of an organ in the humid air. He sang in the choir, his clear voice ringing like a bell, silencing the congregation, some mothers wiping away tears. That was the moment Curtis knew he was born to sing. At home, he tinkered with an old rusty-stringed guitar a neighbor had given him. The first chords rang out clumsy, but full of feeling. He promised himself that one day he'd lift his family out of Cabrini Green's iron cage. But life wasn't as simple as he imagined. In December 1954, on a bone-chilling winter night, Curtis walked home from church after helping with Christmas preparations. He clutched a loaf of bread his mother had wrapped, skipping along the street. Suddenly, a group of teens blocked his path in a dark alley, their eyes like hungry wolves. They demanded money, but Curtis had nothing but the bread. Fists rained down fast and brutal. Curtis fell to the sidewalk, his face bruised. They left him curled up in the cold, nearly unconscious. No one could have guessed that night would inspire his first song, a self-written gospel piece about finding light in the darkness. And then, in June 1956, Curtis began a new journey. He thought he'd found that light when he joined the Roosters later. The Impressions with Jerry Butler and a few friends from Cabrini Green. They sang in churches, their audience weary mothers and elderly folks. But Curtis's soaring tenor blended with unique guitar chords rooted in gospel and blues stunned listeners. His voice echoed as if telling the story of the neighborhood's pain, bringing tears to their eyes. Around this time, a ray of light broke through his life in alleys thick with coal smoke, children's laughter mixing with car horns. Curtis met Helen, the first woman to capture his heart. Helen was gentle with deep eyes and a smile that made Curtis, young and struggling in poverty, feel like the world lit up. They fell in love, as Curtis was finding his footing with the Impressions, still a backup singer behind Jerry Butler, his dream of fame, a distant glimmer. As the Impressions rose to fame, Curtis felt he could give Helen a better future. They married in a simple ceremony at a small Chicago church, surrounded by close family and friends. Their married life unfolded in a cramped apartment where Curtis's guitar filled the nights, mingling with the cries of their two children, born one after the other. Helen tended to the family while Curtis poured himself into music. But an artist's life isn't just spotlights and applause. In March 1957, the Impressions performed at a rundown West Side bar, thick with cigarette smoke and drunken shouts mid-song. Curtis saw a glass fly toward him. It shattered near his foot, glass scattering everywhere. But Curtis didn't flinch. He locked eyes with the thrower, his singing paused in shock, but then resumed stronger. After the show, Jerry Butler clapped his shoulder, saying Curtis had the makings of a true warrior. That praise filled him with pride, but marked the start of tensions in the group. By May 1958, the Impressions recorded For Your Precious Love. Curtis's poetic, soulful lyrics spoke of love and black pride in a prejudiced society. He'd hear his song on the radio in corner stores, his heart racing with surging joy. But that happiness didn't last. In late March 1960, Jerry Butler announced he was leaving for a solo career, leaving 17-year-old Curtis to lead the group. The news hit like a thunderbolt, and Curtis felt the ground crumble beneath him. But Jerry's departure wasn't just about ambition. Cracks in their relationship had been forming. In late 1959, at a Southside cafe, Jerry hinted that Curtis was too controlling from songwriting to the group's direction. Whispers behind Curtis's back left him reeling, though deep down he knew Jerry was unhappy with uneven profit splits. Once in December 1959, Jerry refused to perform, citing exhaustion, leaving Curtis to face the crowd alone. Doubting glances and divisions among other members emerged like hairline cracks in glass, small but irreparable. When Jerry left, Curtis faced immense pressure. The rift between them never healed. They maintained a polite facade in public, but an invisible wall grew and fans sensed the shift through disjointed interviews. Despite the burdens, Curtis carried the group forward over the next half-decade. However, financial strain and band responsibilities kept him away from home. Helen, though devoted, faced loneliness as Curtis poured himself into music and tours. Young love, however passionate, couldn't always withstand the storms Curtis was swept up in, growing fame, and its temptations led his heart astray. When he returned home, the air between them grew heavy. Helen likely saw the change in the eyes of the man who'd promised her the world. Their marriage ended quietly in the mid-1960s before Curtis became a true star. By August 1965, another issue arose. In Chicago's sweltering heat, 23-year-old Curtis Mayfield sweated not from exhaustion, but from something else. He'd just finished People Get Ready, a song like a torch for the civil rights movement. Its gospel notes and calls for hope and unity rang like a wake-up bell for a generation. Recording it, Curtis felt he'd sent a message to the world. The song spread fast from Harlem churches to Birmingham's dusty streets. But fame always comes with shadows. Days later, Curtis received a letter from an Alabama radio station refusing to play People Get Ready for inciting unrest. Other local stations shunned it too. Curtis wasn't just angry. He felt a vague fear, hearing rumors that the FBI had him on a list of troublemakers for singing about justice. Pressure wasn't just external. One January 1966, evening dining with producer Johnny Pate, a colleague bluntly warned Curtis to stick to romantic ballads, safe, marketable songs, instead of diving into politics. but Curtis brushed it off and wrote, "We're a winner" in March 1967. The song was a bold jab at prejudice, declaring that Black Americans wouldn't just survive, but triumph, recording it. Curtis's voice rang with pride, as if daring every critic. The world doesn't easily yield to dreams. In June 1968, in a cramped Chicago studio, Curtis and the Impressions worked on "This Is My Country," a bold claim of Black ownership of America. After sending the track out, an ABC Records executive called, warning it could offend white audiences and ruin the group's career. Curtis replied calmly but firmly that if listeners didn't like it, that was their problem, not his. That choice sparked a fire, and some colleagues began to distance themselves. They whispered that Curtis was too arrogant, too reckless. But he wasn't alone. Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder, also embracing socially conscious music, became his allies, guiding lights. One fall morning in September 1968, on a Harlem stage, Curtis performed "This Is My Country." To a black crowd, their eyes gleaming with pride. But in the South, threatening letters poured in, calling him a traitor and troublemaker. One letter sent to the Impressions office in red ink vowed Curtis would pay dearly if he continued. Amid the storm, Curtis made a bold move. In late 1968, he founded Curtom Records, a burning dream to control his music and bow to no one. But reality was harsher than he expected. One July 1969 evening in Curtom's small office, Curtis discovered a distributor had embezzled a large chunk of revenue. Curtom sank into debt, forcing Curtis to borrow to pay staff. Trouble kept coming. In January 1970, the Staple Singers signed to Curtom complained Curtis was neglecting their album for his solo work. Mavis Staples, frustrated, demanded more investment for Let's Do It Again. Curtis promised to adjust, but a tight budget left him powerless like a soldier without weapons. Competition in the music industry worsened things. In February 1970, at a New York event, Curtis heard Motown was heavily promoting Marvin Gaye while Curtom struggled to find distribution. A Motown producer at a party mocked that Curtis thought he could compete with just a few political songs. The jab stung, but Curtis didn't quit. He poured his heart into the Superfly album set for 1972. But pressure mounted. A week later, a bank letter threatened to seize Curtom's assets over unpaid debts. Desperation made him question if his dream of independence was worth the cost. In March 1970, Curtis made a life-changing decision. He left the Impressions. When he told Fred Cash and Sam Gooden, the air grew heavy, as if oxygen had been sucked out. Sam, voice low and sad, asked if Curtis was abandoning them for Curtom and new songs. Curtis explained he needed creative freedom, but Fred's cold stare accused him of breaking their family tensions flared over rights to old hits. Fred and Sam felt Curtis unfairly kept most profits, as if stealing their sweat. The talk ended in silence, and they rarely met each other's eyes again. Even fans split. Many said the Impressions were everything that Curtis betrayed them. The criticism cut like a knife, but he stood firm. In September 1970, when Move On Up blared on radios, Curtis felt the power of his new path and knew he hadn't chosen wrong. Yet a void lingered. Writing "We People Who Are Darker Than Blue." The music's highs and lows echoed his own pain, the pain of a man who'd found freedom but lost brothers. As Curtis became a Chicago soul icon, he met Althida, the woman who'd stand by him through dazzling highs and crushing lows. Althida, with fierce beauty and a steadfast heart, entered Curtis's life as he shaped his socially conscious sound. They married in the early 1970s as Curtis left the Impressions for a solo career and launched Curtom Records, his independent music empire. Their marriage began in a Chicago home where the laughter of their 6 children blended with Curtis's guitar and demo tapes from his home studio. Althida wasn't just a wife, but a partner, managing the details Curtis lost in music, often overlooked. She kept the home fires burning even as Curtis toured or dove into ambitious projects and soundtracks that made him a national name. But their marriage wasn't always smooth. Curtis, a musical genius, wasn't a perfect husband. Fame and pressure sometimes led him astray, resulting in moments of infidelity. There were even rare but painful instances of domestic violence, weak moments that left deep scars. Althida, with patience and love, stayed not just for the kids, but because she believed in the man who wrote songs that moved millions. Over the next decade, Curtis's career soared. The family moved from Chicago to Atlanta in 1980, along with Curtom's headquarters. Althida orchestrated the move, packing their memory-filled home and helping the kids adjust. Atlanta offered a fresh start, but fate loomed. No one could foresee the world-shattering change awaiting Curtis and Althida. In May 1987, the light in a Chicago studio dimmed as Curtis 44 collapsed mid-session. Sweat-soaked, his vision blurred. His guitar crashed to the floor as he fell. Panicked musicians propped him up, but Curtis, dazed, forced a smile, saying he just needed rest. A hospital visit brought shocking news. Type 2 diabetes had been silently ravaging his body. It left him exhausted sometimes, unable to stand for 30 minutes. In his hospital bed, staring out the window, Curtis felt fate had stolen part of his soul, but he hid his fear. Only to Althida did he quietly vow not to let the disease win. Diabetes was a relentless foe. One July 1988 night at a small Detroit club, Curtis grew dizzy, mid-performance. He stopped singing, sat on stage pretending it was part of the act. The crowd didn't suspect, but Althida, watching from the wings, wept, seeing him struggle. Curtis hid his illness from the public, refusing pity, but his body betrayed him. One January 1990 morning, eating breakfast in Atlanta, Curtis suddenly lost feeling in his left hand. His plate shattered on the floor. Doctors warned diabetes was destroying his nerves. Without control, he could lose his ability to play guitar, the lifeline to his world. Panicked inside, Curtis held Althida's hand and softly said he'd fight, but deep down, he knew the battle would be brutal. On August 13, 1990, Brooklyn's sky was grim winds, howling through Wingate Field. Like an omen, Curtis 48 prepared for an outdoor festival set. By 5 p.m., winds grew fierce, whipping dust and leaves rattling the stage. The metal lighting rig creaked ominously. Despite weather warnings, organizers pressed on 10,000 tickets sold. Curtis, uneasy about the swaying rig, stepped on stage at 7:05 p.m., his familiar smile, flashing guitar slung over his shoulder. The crowd roared, unaware of the tragedy looming. Minutes later, as Curtis strummed the opening notes of "People Get Ready," a 60-kilometer-stage gust tore through. A horrific crack split the air. The 1,000-pound lighting rig collapsed, crushing Curtis. The crowd screamed, chaos erupting. Althida, 10 meters away, ran forward, yelling his name amid the noise. Curtis lay motionless under the metal, his shattered guitar beside him, strings splayed like wounds. It took rescuers 15 minutes to lift the rig, each second stabbing Althida's heart. Curtis was rushed to Kings County Hospital in critical condition, machines beeping frantically. On August 14, 1990, a pale-faced doctor announced Curtis had 3 broken cervical vertebrae and severe spinal cord damage. Paralyzed from the neck down, he couldn't move, play music, or breathe without aid. Althida collapsed, sobbing as if the world had crumbled. The weeks after were a living hell. In a sterile New York hospital room, Curtis lay immobile, only his eyes alive, burning with silent pain. Each night, staring out the window, he whispered to Althida. He didn't want to live like this. His words cut her heart. Diabetes slowed, his healing infections raged, fevers racked his motionless body. On October 3, 1990, Curtis struggled to breathe. His chest constricted, nurses rushed in machines, drowning out Althida's cries. He survived, but each day was a fight. Yet Curtis never gave up. On November 15, 1990, he asked Althida to place a mic near his mouth. Lying flat, racked by pain from weak lungs, he sang in short bursts, each note a defiance of fate, proof his spirit hadn't broken. The accident didn't just steal his body, it pushed his family to the brink. Curtom Records, already struggling, collapsed in March 1991, unable to pay debts. On April 10, 1991, Althida faced a $75,000 medical bill with only a few thousand in the bank. She sold their last car once, a lifeline in tough times. Curtis's 6 kids, from teens to adults, watched their mother work 16-hour days cleaning and selling to keep them afloat. On July 18, 1992, in their small Atlanta home, Althida and their eldest son Todd argued fiercely over selling Superfly rights to pay debts. Todd shouted it was his father's lifeblood. Unsellable, Curtis, on a medical bed nearby, heard but couldn't speak. After the fruitless fight, he gripped Althida's hand, eyes red as if saying he understood, sorry he couldn't protect them. Financial strain cracked everything. On October 5, 1993, their youngest daughter, 15, ran away after a fight with siblings. She screamed that her father wasn't the dad he used to be, that the family was shattered. Althida found her after 3 days curled up in a park, but the damage was done. Curtis, hearing this, sank deeper into depression. He lay staring at the ceiling, tears falling silently. Charity concerts like one in Chicago on August 20, 1994, raised funds, but it was a drop in the desert. On February 12, 1996, at home, Curtis learned a former Curtom partner had embezzled $20,000 from Superfly revenue. The wound in his heart deepened. In February 1994, at the Los Angeles Grammys, Curtis Mayfield's name was honored as People Get Ready entered the Grammy Hall of Fame, and he received the Legend Award. But at 51, Curtis could only watch through a fuzzy TV in his quiet Roswell, Georgia hospital room. His body still, his eyes shone with pride and pain. Althida sat by his bed, holding his hand, fighting tears as the Grammy audience gave Curtis a standing ovation. Despite his breaking body, Curtis resolved to create New World Order, his final album. On June 15, 1995, in a makeshift bedroom studio, Curtis lay on a medical bed, a mic inches from his lips. Diabetes and weak lungs let him sing only a few words before gasping through an oxygen tube. On August 10, 1995, after a failed take from chest pain, Curtis wept, feeling he'd lost himself. Althida wiped his tears softly, saying the world still needed his voice. Then a worse tragedy struck. On July 15, 1995, before New World Order was done, a horrific fire erupted in the Roswell home's basement, sparked by faulty wiring during renovations for music storage. Flames devoured dozens of Curtis's handwritten songs, unreleased gems from the Impressions era. Althida upstairs with Curtis screamed as smoke billowed frantically, calling firefighters. Curtis, immobile, heard glass shatter and smelled acrid smoke. Tears streamed as he thought of his lost music. Firefighters doused the blaze, but the basement was ash. Though the house survived, the fire burned part of Curtis's soul, deepening his depression. After hundreds of painful hours, the album was finished in March 1996. On April 5, 1996, hearing the final mix, Curtis gave a weak smile, but a fever from infection soon made him pass out, needing emergency care at home. Each note of New World Order was an inner battle, and Curtis, though defeated by his body, remained a hero to his family. By April 1996, the Roswell home where Curtis spent his final years was no longer a haven, but a crumbling fortress. White walls stained the oak-filled backyard, a faint memory of days Curtis could hear birds to ease his pain. His bedroom, now a hospital room with a medical bed and ventilator, was his last battlefield. New World Order completed, in agony, proved he never surrendered. But his body, ravaged by diabetes and paralyzed since 1990, couldn't hold on. On May 10, 1996, as Althida wheeled Curtis to the backyard, he gazed at the sky, his eyes dimming after years of struggle. He whispered to her, asking to hear People Get Ready again. Althida played the cassette, and as the notes rang out, Curtis closed his eyes as if back on the Apollo Theater stage in 1970, with crowds screaming his name. By December 1999, Curtis's health was critical. Over a decade of diabetes had wrecked his nerves and immune system. Paralysis left him prone to skin and respiratory infections with unhealing back sores. On December 8, 1999 in Roswell, Curtis spiked a 104-degree fever. His breathing labored. Althida, sensing danger, called an ambulance. Within 10 minutes, he was at North Fulton Regional Hospital. In the ICU, surrounded by tubes and machines, his 95-pound frame was pale, covered in sores. The heart monitor beeped steadily, but each breath was a fight. Althida, Todd, Sharon, and Tracy stayed by his side, gripping hands to hold back tears. Curtis, conscious but unable to speak from weak lungs, looked at them with love and regret. On December 23, 1999, Curtis slipped into a semi-conscious state. On Christmas morning, his heart rate slowed, the ventilator straining to keep him alive. At 7:22 a.m. on December 26, 1999, the monitor flatlined. Doctors confirmed Curtis died of multi-organ failure from sepsis, respiratory failure, and diabetic complications, all tied to 9 years of paralysis. Althida collapsed on his bed, sobbing, clutching his body. Sharon screamed his name as if her cries could bring him back. News of Curtis's death spread fast. That evening, an Atlanta radio station halted its schedule to play "We're a Winner" and "Move On Up Nonstop." Across America, those who grew up with his music turned on radios, tears falling, but the family's tragedy didn't end. In May 2000, Althida uncovered a horrifying truth. Curtom Records' Curtis's musical legacy had been nearly drained by former partners, skimming Superfly revenue. By April 2001, she sold the Roswell home to pay debts and support the kids. Before leaving, the family felt Curtis's spirit lingering in the memory-filled house. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Althida sensed someone by the old hospital room window, watching as if Curtis remained. Once, while cleaning the living room, the lights flickered as if an unseen hand touched the switch. Althida paused, eyes scanning the dark, her heart tightening. She knew, though, Curtis was gone. His soul lingered here, where every moment was etched. His kids felt it too. Todd, Sharon, and Tracy sometimes heard faint guitar notes, as if Curtis played a soothing melody on rainy nights. Once in the old kitchen, Tracy felt a breeze brush her shoulder and heard a soft laugh, as if Curtis stood behind watching his children. They never spoke of it, but deep down, they knew his spirit endured, steadfast, as the house's walls, never fading. In 2003, the family's tragedy deepened when they learned Marv Hyman Curtis's longtime manager had embezzled millions in royalties. Althida sued Hyman, demanding his removal from the family trust. Hyman sold Superfly rights for $54 million, but gave each child only $65,000, pocketing a $540,000 commission and hundreds of thousands in office fees. He even threatened to cut Althida's quarterly income. The prolonged lawsuit deepened their wounds. Curtis's legacy, immortal, through works like Superfly and People Get Ready, was overshadowed by endless disputes and profound loss. Though the family faced unhealing scars, Curtis's fans forever cherish his image. At a Chicago memorial concert on July 15, 2000, a young Kanye West, then a producer, choked up saying Curtis taught him music could change the world. Later, Jay-Z and Alicia Keys wove People Get Ready into their work, a tribute to Curtis. But for Curtis's family, the painful years remain unhealing scars. The Roswell home, no longer theirs, lives on in their memories. Its white walls, now yellowed, still echo early mornings when Curtis sat by the window, gazing at the oak-filled yard, listening to birds to dull his pain. Sadly, that house is now a silent space, holding an unquiet soul and memories that never let go.